Our preaching text today is from the book of Genesis, chapter 32, verses 22 to 31. The same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "What is it that you ask my name? Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Good morning, church.
Good morning.
Blessings to all this wonderful Sunday morning. As a boy, I was afraid to get into fights. I wasn't big, and I certainly wasn't very strong physically, even though I wrestled with my stronger twin brother regularly. But luckily, the neighborhood bullies stayed away from me because of my older brother Jim and my twin brother Jack. I was grateful then, and I continue to be grateful for the gift of brothers and the protection they gave me in my childhood. Because of my careful avoidance of fights as a child, it was strange to me that at the age of 35 that I would begin training as a martial artist. I was serving as campus minister at Louisiana Tech University in Ruston, Louisiana. As the director of the Catholic Student Center, I wanted to initiate a program to help the students with exercise and discipline. I discovered there was a black belt instructor who was teaching Taekwondo in town that might be willing to teach at the Student Center. I went to see him at a bar where he was working as a bouncer. His name was Farak Zahari, and he was a former bodyguard of the Shah of Iran. Farak was willing to start a Taekwondo class at the Catholic Student Center, but only on one condition: I'd have to take the class. I'm not sure if I would have otherwise taken the class or not. I didn't think of myself in any way as a martial artist. But here it was, an invitation. So I accepted. For over 7 years, I went to class 2 or 3 times a week. For 7 years, I was continually bruised from the training and the sparring, the fighting that was part of every workout. It was very hard, very trying physically, but I kept going. I never missed a class if I was in town during my 3 years in Ruston and my 4 years down the road as pastor and campus minister at Grambling State University. I made my way through the various color belts, white to yellow to orange to green to blue to 3 levels of red and finally to black belt. And I continued after being awarded my first degree black belt through second degree to third degree. I probably would have kept going except that Farak died because of a burst appendix that was misdiagnosed. I mention this today because during my Taekwondo training, I also competed in a variety of tournaments, including the Louisiana State Tournament. I stopped competing and started teaching in 1990. But during my tournament life, I never lost a match. But I recall to this day the first Taekwondo match I competed in. In my first match, I was set to fight someone who looked like a giant to me. He was considerably taller than my own 6'4" and was 30 or 40 pounds heavier than me. I began wondering what in God's name I was doing getting ready to fight him. If there had been a way to exit gracefully, I'd have taken it. But there were many fellow students from my dojang who were watching. So since no graceful exit presented itself, I'd have to fight. We put on our sparring gear and stepped into the competition area. I began the match with trembling legs and squeamish stomach. But I soon realized that his bulk, his size, kept him from being quick. While his strength was probably considerably greater than my own, his speed was much slower. The match wasn't nearly the challenge I'd expected. Happily, my fear of appearing a coward had kept me from avoiding this first fight. Sisters and brothers, when we hear in our preaching text about Jacob's wrestling with God, we can be sure that Jacob would have avoided the fight if he could have. Jacob was a schemer, always scheming to get an upper hand. He basically stole the firstborn birthright from his twin brother Esau for a plate of stew, and later conspired with his mother Rebekah to snatch the special firstborn blessing from his father. I heard it. Isaac. Okay. He flees from his brother's wrath after his duplicity with his father. And Jacob also spends some 20 years scheming against his uncle Laban. We might well remember the story. After Jacob flees from his brother's wrath, he goes to the ancestral home of his grandfather, Abraham, to seek a wife. He sees and falls in love with Rachel. Since Jacob has no resources, no bride price, he promises to work 7 years for his uncle Laban in order to marry his younger daughter Rachel. And as the Bible states it, Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. But what happens after the 7 years? Laban conspires against his nephew Jacob, just as Jacob conspired against his own father. And on the morning after the wedding, he discovers that he has married the eldest daughter, Leah, instead of his beloved Rachel. So Jacob has to work another 7 years for Rachel. After the second wedding, Jacob works for another 6 years for his uncle until things become too tense between them. Jacob decides to return to the land of the Canaanites, the land promised by God to his grandfather and to him. Just before entering the promised land and his uncertain reunion with his twin brother, Jacob spends the night alone on the east side of the Jabbok River. The Jabbok River runs into the Jordan just above the Dead Sea. During that night, exhausted from his travels and anxious about reuniting with Esau, a mysterious man comes and wrestles with Jacob. The text in Genesis doesn't mention who this mysterious wrestler is. Jacob sees this wrestler as God. In a commentary on the story found in Hosea, the prophet speaks about Jacob wrestling an angel. But in our Genesis account, we don't know who it is. Let's call him, as Jacob calls him, God Almighty has wrestled with Jacob. So, brothers and sisters, what is this mysterious passage all about? Why does God wrestle Jacob all night? I believe God wrestles with Jacob in order to help Jacob confront what he must confront if he is to become who God wishes him to become. As the spiritual writer Joan Chittister writes in Scarred by Struggle, Transformed by Hope, Jacob does what all of us must do if in the end we too are to become true. Jacob confronts in himself the things that are wounding him, admits his limitations, accepts his situation, rejoins the world, and moves on. Sisters and brothers, there is a vital message in Jacob's struggle on the banks of the Jabbok River. Let's listen to Chittister explain this to us. However hard I strive to prove otherwise, I know there is no such thing as life without struggle. There is no one who does not have to choose sometime, some way between giving up and growing stronger as they go along. And yet if we give up in the midst of struggle, we never find out what the struggle would have given us in the end. If we decide to endure it to the end, we come out of it changed by the doing of it. Was it worth my years of struggle and pain to become a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo? I don't know. But I do know that in the years of struggle, I became stronger in both body and soul. I was able to endure where many faltered and dropped away. And I now believe that endurance is vital for a full spiritual life. Jacob wrestles all night. He keeps at it, even though he is tired. Even when the stranger wants to get away at the morning light, Jacob won't let him go until he is blessed. This is a blessing that Jacob, and Jacob alone, earns. Not like the blessing he steals from his father with the help of his mother. That blessing was stolen. The blessing given on the banks of the Jabbok River was earned. And what happens with this blessing? Jacob is given a new name by God. He is no longer Jacob the schemer, Jacob the trickster, as his name means. Jacob, the one who stole his brother Esau's birthright and blessing. He is now Israel, the one who has struggled with God. But the struggle was necessary as a kind of atonement for the deceit, especially against his own brother. Brothers and sisters, I call us all to continue the struggles in which we find ourselves, the physical struggles, the psychological struggles, the spiritual struggles. These struggles can make us stronger. These struggles are normally how we grow. I know of no other way to grow than to grow through challenges and struggles. Recently, my beloved Beth took care of a couple of monarch butterfly chrysalises while they became butterflies. She has done this for a number of years. And it's known that an emerging butterfly must beat its wings against the walls of the chrysalis in order to break free. The butterfly's wings become strong through the hard process of freeing itself from the chrysalis. If the butterfly is freed prematurely, without undergoing this struggle, it would die. It would not be able to fly because its wings would be too weak. There is a message here for all of us. My beloved Beth is right now in the midst of her training for the October 9th Chicago Marathon. She has never run a marathon, but has decided to endure all the struggles, all the miles, the many miles of training needed to run 26.2 miles. Is it hard? Of course it's hard. And we won't know until October 9th, the date of the marathon, the outcome of all her struggles and all her training. But I applaud her in this serious struggle, this significant physical challenge. Sisters and brothers, I wonder if Christianity has lost much of its appeal because the challenges of Christianity seem to have faded away. What does Christianity cost us today? For most of us, being Christian doesn't cost us very much. Some time, some money. But Christianity should ideally be a forge that fashions us into better people, people with strong souls who have endured struggles of every shape and size as we seek to make the life choices God would have us choose. This is the type of Christianity I wish to be associated with. Not a bland and stress-free Christianity. as Chittister notes, life forges us in struggle. We find ourselves pitted against forces of our own making and against forces beyond the edges of our understanding, greater than the limits of our strength to repel. But it is not the struggle that defeats us. It is our failure to struggle that depletes our human spirit. Let us hear this again, brothers and sisters. It is not struggle that defeats us. It is our failure to struggle that depletes our human spirit. In other words, if we give up, then our spirit becomes depleted within us. If we give up, our soul dries up. This is not what God wishes for us. God wishes for us to become strong servants of God. This is the message of Jacob wrestling with God. God forges us in our struggles, just as Jacob is wounded for life after his encounter with God prior to being reunited with his brother Esau. So we also become wounded by our struggles in life. But if we align ourselves with God, then after the struggle, after the wounding, comes the blessing. Sisters and brothers, when we align ourselves with God, then after the struggle, after the wounding, comes the blessing. And please know, sisters and brothers, I willingly stand with anyone who is struggling. I willingly share any strength I may have with anyone here in need of strength, be it physical strength, psychological strength, spiritual strength. And I know most everyone here would do the same if I were in need. This is what it means to be church. But I must caution us, as Hebrews chapter 10 verse 31 asserts. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So how do we wrestle with God? Brothers and sisters, we wrestle with God by always keeping before our eyes, before our hearts, before our souls, this life truth, this faith truth. When we align ourselves with God, then, after the struggle, after the wounding, then, and only then, comes the blessing. Amen.